Especially
Richard.
in the Jewish tradition, we would call today Erev Slope Day. Thank you for being here. Erev Slope Day. My name is Rabbi Ari Weiss. I have the honor to be the CEO of Principal and Fellow at Cornell. I've been here for about 10 years, and we're really excited that we're starting a new lecture series today titled Confronting Antisemitism. And we're really glad that Professor Rand and Professor Rand are here. And this is such a topical issue. Without getting into every detail, Hillel just actually had an perhaps AI-generated anti-Semitic incident the other day. So this is very relevant and pertinent. I actually want to just read a bit from, we're very fortunate this is an endowed lecture series, so this is something we hope to be doing annually, and is endowed by Cheryl Strauss-Einhorn. Cheryl could not be here today, but she asked me to read a bit, so I'm just going to read a message from Cheryl. Why this lecture series and who is Cheryl? Insight and Action, Confronting Anti-Semitism by Cheryl Strauss-Einhorn. We are living in an age of extraordinary access to ideas. Insight is abundant, and yet for all this intellectual progress, something more fundamental has not kept pace. People have not gotten better at understanding one another, navigating difference, or resisting the pull of prejudice. We may be more informed, but we are not more tolerant. The gap is especially visible in the persistence and resurgence of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism adapts. It appears in new forms, travels quickly across digital spaces, and embeds itself in narratives that feel plausible to those encountering them for the first time. It is sustained not only by misinformation, but by unexamined assumptions and the quiet normalization of harmful language. Just as often, it persists because people do not know how to respond. When a stereotype is repeated or when a comment crosses a line, silence can feel easier than engagement. This is where insight must meet action. And this is the premise behind this lecture series. Focused on combating anti-Semitism through both understanding and practice. Awareness alone does not change behavior. Recognizing the problem is not the same as interrupting it. And the distance between these two, recognition and interruption, is where progress is most often lost. The purpose of the series is to close that distance by deepening understanding of the history of anti-Semitism, how it evolves and how it manifests today, while equipping participants to respond, to ask better questions when confronted with misinformation, to distinguish between legitimate critique and harmful generalization, to engage with clarity and composure rather than avoidance and escalation. If we can build these practical capabilities, they may shape how we show up in classrooms, workplaces, and communities, determining whether harmful ideas pass unchallenged or are thoughtfully examined. Anti-Semitism is but one expression of a larger pattern, fear, simplification, and distance giving rise to bias. Addressing it with rigor and care builds the capacity to engage across difference more generally, an essential skill in an increasingly complex, siloed, anxious, and interconnected world. It is over time our interactions with anti-Semitism and other types of bias can begin to shift. The effects will be profound, not the absence of disagreement, but a different quality of it, not a world without tension, but one where tension does not give way to harm. It is a path that traveled over time, will lead to sharper understanding, and ultimately a world where people can lead with connected and compassion because they recognize themselves in strangers. What a great Erev Slope Day message. But it's just that's really our hope, and we hope that this will grow and grow. And really, I've been here for 10 years, and there's been more and more anti-Semitism on campus, which is just so frightening. I grew up in an age between anti-Semitism. I've experienced just a little when I was growing up in New York City, but all of my grandparents are survivors, and I thought that was a thing of the past, and it's so sad that it's coming. I'll just say a little bit about Cheryl Strauss-Einhorn is the creator of the Area Method, a decision-making system for individual companies and nonprofits to solve complex problems. Cheryl's the founder of Decision Science Company, Decisive, offering leadership training, curriculum, coaching, and professional development services, and is an adjunct professor at Cornell. She is the author of the award-winning books Problem Solved about personal and professional decision-making and investing in financial research, about financial and investment decisions, and Problem Solver about the psychology of decision-making and problem solver profiles. Her newest book, The Human Edge, Smarter Decisions in the Age of AI, will be published this month by Cornell. For more information, check out Cheryl's TED Talk and visit areamethod.com. And Cheryl is a former trustee of Cornell Hillel. And I'm really glad that Professor Rank is here. We've had a chance to talk, and this is the first time meeting in person. And we've been wanting to have this lecture for a good long time. So thank you for being here, and thank you all.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the invite. Thanks for coming, folks. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about research that my group has been doing on trying to debunk anti-Semitic conspiracy theories using AI. And where I'm going to start is talking about work that we did, that we published a couple of years ago, on just trying to deal with conspiracy theories in general. And then I'll talk about the sort of newer work specifically focusing on anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. So let's start with, like, what is a conspiracy theory? And so conspiracy theories are theories whereby events are understood as being caused not by their straightforward explanation, but as the result of secret malevolent plots involving powerful conspirators. And of course, sometimes conspiracies are true. Like, powerful conspirators do sometimes conspire, but a lot of the time the conspiracies are quite implausible, pretty obviously not true. And various different previous estimates have found something like like half of Americans believe at least one pretty obviously not true conspiracy. And so the question is, how do so many people believe conspiracies? Like, it's often held up as the paradigmatic example of resistance to correction or evidence, because given that all this debunking information exists out there, how could people possibly still believe these, like, clearly not true conspiracies? And so there's this whole big body of psychological theory that argues essentially that conspiracy theories are psychologically useful. It makes people feel in control, it makes the world predictable, it makes people feel special, and as a result, people want to believe. And because they want to believe, they don't want the corrections, and so when you give them debunking information, they tune it out and ignore it. And so that's the basic take. It says once somebody believes the conspiracy, essentially it's too late. There's no way to get them out of the rabbit hole. And as someone that's worked on misinformation for the last decade, I've had many conversations with journalists along this line where they're like, what do you do? And I was like, well, once they believe the conspiracy, it's too late, and we got to always just be focused on trying to preventing them from believing it in the first place. And that's sort of like where my thinking on this, and I think the general state of the science, had been prior to this work. And so we were thinking about it, and we were like, well, okay, that's one take. But another possibility is that it's just actually hard, in some practical sense, to debunk conspiracy theories. Because they're super varied. There's tons of different conspiracy theories. If they're not true, they're not constrained by the truth. So every person can have their own individual version of the conspiracy they believe. And so when you start trying to correct them, it doesn't work, because you might have some general response, but you don't have a response that is able to tie into the exact specific thing that person believes. And so if you want to do it, you need to be able to have a huge amount of information on essentially every different topic, and the ability to pull out just the right piece of information in order to respond to whatever the person said, and we don't. And that's why we in general have been unsuccessful at debunking conspiracy theories. And you can see this even when, like, experts, you have debates between experts and conspiracy theorists. A lot of the time what the conspiracy theorists will do is like, what about this crazy piece of evidence? What about this crazy piece of evidence? And the expert's like, it doesn't sound right. But like, it's not very compelling. It's called the Gishgalop, is that strategy of just like always coming up with different random facts and outmaneuvering the debunker. And so, the way this project started, I was thinking, well, hey, what is it that has access to all that information and the ability to personalize? Large language models. And so I was at a workshop with a bunch of computer scientists, like fairly early in the post-ChatGPT era, and like this occurred to me, and I was like, all right, let's see, like, can we have a conversation between a conspiracy theorist and, at that time, the frontier GPT model, which is GPT 4.0, can that effectively talk people out of believing the conspiracy theories? Like, can the reason and arguments work if they're sufficiently compelling? Or is it the sort of classic story where the people want to believe, and so the identity and the motivations are going to blind them, and they're just going to ignore the evidence? So the way we did this as follows. This is a collaboration with Tom Costello, who was my postdoc at the time, and Gord Pennycook. And so, like, if I was going to have done this study, I would have just said, well, okay, here's a bunch of different conspiracy theories. How much do you believe each one? Like, great, now we talk about one. But Tom had the really cool idea of another way you can leverage the sort of AI technology is to let them say in their own words whatever it is they want. And so here's one person that says the 9/11 attacks. I've seen lots of stories and videos on how it was deliberately staged. The government was behind the attacks. And then there's two pieces of evidence, this person says. World Trade Center Building 7 collapsed even though it wasn't hit by a plane. And Bush didn't seem at all surprised when they whispered it in his ear when he was reading to the kids. He just sat there and kept reading to the kids. And so then we summarize it back to them using the LLM. And we're like, okay, here's the one sentence summary. This is what you said. 0 to 100, how much do you believe it? And so this particular person says 100 out of 100. They're totally convinced that 9/11 was an inside job.
Can I ask something?
Please.
You're okay with questions
Yeah,
during the talk?
great.
That's already an interesting move to repeat it back to the person. Like, you're often taught that in listening to someone, it's good to say back what they just said to show you really heard them. Do you think that helped in this process? Because that's not an obvious step that you would summarize what they just said in AI speak.
Yeah, I guess the reason that we did it was we wanted to have like a clear, like, you know, if somebody wrote a whole big rambling thing.
Sure.
But we have subsequently done replications where we didn't do this step and they write out whatever they want and then we just say, okay, 0 to 100, how much do you believe it? It doesn't really make much difference.
Okay, so that
And
mirroring
that's not a critical,
not important
not a critical
thing.
ingredient.
Okay, interesting.
Okay, and then after they do that, they have a 3-round back and forth conversation with the AI. And in the treatment, we tell the person, all right, now you're going to have a conversation with an AI, so they know they're talking to an AI, you know, about what you talked about, blah, blah, blah. And this is the instructions we give to the AI. They don't just go to ChatGPT and do whatever with ChatGPT. We make our own version where we give it specific instructions, and we say, your goal is to effectively persuade the people to stop believing the conspiracy. And, you know, we tell them what conspiracy theory it was, and we tell them how much they believed it, and we say persuade them that it's not supported, and get them to change their beliefs to be less conspiratorial. So that's the people in the treatment. But now we want to make sure that whatever change we're seeing is based on actually, you know, talking about conspiracies, and it's not just talking to an AI about anything, or just the passage of time. And regression to the mean is a thing I was worried about in these experiments. So in the control, they also have a 3-round back and forth conversation with the AI, but it's just about something irrelevant, like dogs versus cats, or the medical system, or firefighters. They get randomly assigned to one of these. So here's a sample of what happens with our 9/11 conspiracies. It comes out in nice GPT format. It's very long, so we kind of tried to truncate it to squeeze it on here. But the basic idea is the AI says, okay, thanks for sharing your thoughts and concerns. We understand, given the complexity, why questions arise, whatever. Okay, what about it? Yes, Building 7 collapsed, even though it wasn't hit by a plane. That's because it was hit by debris from a tower that was hit by the plane that caught it on fire and caused it to collapse. And it's like, yes, Bush didn't respond, but that's not because he knew about it. He was just trying not to cause a panic. And people argue about whether that's right or wrong, but that's what's going on. And the person says, okay, that may be true, but essentially, what about the evidence about demolitions bringing the Twin Towers down, and also jet fuel doesn't burn hot enough to melt steel? Your standard sort of 9/11 conspiracist talking points. If someone said that to me, I would be like, it doesn't sound right. But like, you know, I wouldn't really know what more to say. But the LLM is like, okay, yeah, people have speculated about demolitions, but like the thing that sounded like explosions going off was just successive floors of the tower collapsing one after another, and it would have taken up months to set up a controlled demolition in the basement. There's no way they could have done that without getting caught. And like, yes, it's true that steel burns at 15 or melts at 1500 degrees Celsius, and jet fuel only burns at 1000 degrees Celsius. But at just 650 degrees Celsius, that's enough for steel to lose half its strength, which is enough to make the building collapse. And then the person's like, all right, fine, well then why did we let these people into our country and give them flying lessons? They got by security really quickly. And the model's like, yes, it's true that that happened, but you have to remember that before 9/11, there weren't any precautions in place to prevent people from learning how to fly, and basically like, don't believe in conspiracies. And then the person's like, all right, thank you. And so then we say, okay, now that you've had the conversation, let's go back to some of the questions we asked you at the beginning. At the beginning, you said this thing, now 0 to 100, how much do you believe it? And so this particular person who started at 100% winds up at 40%. So that's like, you know, a big change. Obviously, this is a particularly good one, but this is like an example of how the thing could work. So more representatively, this is showing you how much the people believe the conspiracy. So like 100 is definitely true, 0 is definitely false. You can see that the most common response is 100 out of 100. And that's because of Tom's cool idea of having them write out in their own words exactly what they believe. So you're successfully identifying things that people really believe. And there's nothing below 50, because if they said, this is like before the conversation, if they said they believed it less than 50, then we're like, all right, you're not who we're interested in. We want the people that actually believe the conspiracy. And so the blue is the control, the red is the treatment. Obviously, they're not different beforehand because nothing's happened yet. And then after the conversation, when they talk about dogs and cats, it doesn't make them believe the conspiracy any less, sort of obviously. But when they talk about the conspiracy, you get about a 20% decrease in belief. It's more than a full standard deviation reduction in belief, which in psychology is a very large effect. To some extent, it depends on your priors. So my prior was at 0 effect. And Tom wanted to try all these different prompts for like different instructions for the model. And I was like, this is almost certainly not going to work. Just like pick one thing that seems reasonable and let's try it. So to me, and to the reviewers and to the people that study conspiracy theories, this looks huge. I've had talks where people are like, well, what about the other people? You didn't convince everyone. And it's like, well, yeah, but I thought it was going to do it. And so if you want to say that people above 50 believe it and people below 50 don't, then like a quarter of the people got talked out of it by the model. So fine, and we were like, well, that's cool, but is this like a real?
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering. I always think about conspiracy theories as like non-rational, right? So like, I wonder is like one of the factors that might predict this amazing decrease. Is there something about like whether their whole families believe it or not, right? Like,
yes.
Like I'm wondering, I think it would be like very hard for me not to believe the conspiracy that the Egyptians enslaved the Jews, right? Like, but like if I was, because that's my whole family system and I celebrate a holiday every year, but if you got me by myself, maybe like I'd be more inclined to not believe that. So I wonder what other factors might predict this like decrease in belief.
Yeah, totally. So in a follow-up experiment, we have one where we ask them, how much do your friends and family also believe this conspiracy? And like, not surprisingly, the more people are socially embedded in the conspiracy, the more likely they are to believe it. But it doesn't actually undercut the treatment effect. And so you still, even for the people that that say that many of their friends that they're really socially embedded, it's still more or less just as effective at reducing it. And with another one, we say, how important is this to you in terms of this belief in this conspiracy in terms of your worldview and your identity and stuff like that? And there, the more important they say it is, the less the treatment works. But even the people that say it's maximally important to them, you still get some significant reduction for those people. And also, another one, we look at basically this scale called the actively open-minded thinking scale. It's a measure of like how much you care about facts and evidence and how much you think you should revise your beliefs in response to evidence. And so like the more people say that, the more they revise their beliefs in the face of evidence. But even people that are pretty low on that, you still see, you have to go to the people that are really at the bottom of that scale that are explicitly like, I don't care about evidence at all. But there's not very many people that are willing to say that, and those are the only folks that it doesn't work.
Just to make sure I understand the picture, you're giving 3 different ways of looking at the same data, it seems. That first you compare histograms,
Yeah.
then you compare, what are those called, like box and whisker or some kind of crazy thing?
Yeah.
And then you do something where you're looking at error bars around the mean?
Right, yes, exactly.
Okay.
So this is showing like the whole distribution. This is summarizing it with the, I think like, it's probably like 75th percentile and 25th percentile or something like that. And then this is the mean with the confidence in the estimate of the mean.
And so but then you're guiding our eye by looking at the means and the confidence interval.
Yeah, that's the sort of standard thing, but you can see essentially there's like a bunch of people down here
Absolutely.
that were not down there before.
Right. And the thing we should be noticing is that the control, if I look at the purple, left and right, not doing anything. And the red, it's a very obvious shift.
Right.
Okay. Just want to make sure I can read it correctly. Okay.
And so then we're like, great, but is this like a real change in people's minds, or was this just a sort of fleeting thing?
Yes.
And so we followed up with them 10 days later,
Okay.
and it's totally durable.
Oh, good.
And we were like, wow, that's crazy. I see the science paper in my mind. Let's start writing. And so we're writing the paper, and then we're ready. The draft is done. We're ready to submit it. And I was like, let's go back to them again and see what happened. So 2 months out,
Really?
still
Get
totally
out.
stable. So I think this honestly is the craziest part of this whole thing,
Yeah.
is the stability.
That's surprising.
And so it like really fundamentally changed their mind about it.
That's really surprising. I didn't expect that coming to this talk.
And so I feel like my take was going into it, I thought conspiracy theories would be more like, one of the things that are most resistant to facts and evidence. But now, after having done it, I think actually they're maybe one of the things that are most flimsy, because fundamentally they don't make sense. And so once you get the better explanation, you're like, oh yeah, I guess the fact that jet fuel doesn't burn hot enough to melt steel really actually is completely irrelevant, because melting steel, you sort of can't unsee that, like, it's weak enough to make the thing collapse. And I think from having, read a lot of the conversations, it seems like, there's a reasonable chunk of people that strongly believe conspiracy theories that only ever heard the conspiratorial account and never heard the non-conspiratorial account, or never heard it explained in a way that was clear. So like one comment that someone said in this thing is they say, thank you, AI, this makes so much more sense than anything any human ever told me about the Illuminati.
Sure.
Yeah, and so like it's not only does the model have access to lots of information, but it's also really good at explaining things. And just to show that it's not that it's only convincing the people that were kind of on the fence. This is how much they believed it beforehand, and this is how much they reduced their belief. And in the control, nobody changes their belief. In the treatment, you get about a 10 to 12 point decrease, regardless of wherever they started. And most importantly, even the people that said 100 out of 100 they believed it at the beginning, so they said they were totally confident, you still get a big treatment effect. So it even works for the entrenched believers. This was this paper that was in Science. We also made a public-facing version, so anybody can go and talk to DebunkBot about any of their favorite conversations. I recommend it.
I need to.
It has changed my mind about something.
Really?
That's actually what I wanted to ask you about, because I've gone on DebunkBot a couple of times and given it some Jew-related conspiracy theories. And as a large language model, it's pulling from conventional whatever. And one of the sources that it quoted to me, I know very well, and I know very well how skewed it is. And so the answer I got actually was, yeah, this is true. And so I'm wondering whether you've looked at that at all, and what your thoughts are on how that plays out.
Yeah, so fundamentally, these things are essentially they have access to all the information, they're able to synthesize it, they're able to explain it well, but it still fundamentally depends on the information that are going into the models. And so then it comes into your, ideally they provide sources, and so then you can evaluate for yourself how credible do you find this. But this is this is an issue, I think that in this particular experiment, this was fairly early in the ChatGPT days, and so we had no idea how good the responses were going to be. And so we hired professional fact checkers to evaluate them, and they were extremely high quality. And I think it's because these conspiracy theories, essentially what it did was read the whole internet. There is a huge amount on the internet about all these classic conspiracy theories. But then essentially, the thinner the background information that it has to work with, the more it's going to depend on what particular sources it's pulling from. And so, so Truth Social has its own built-in AI that you can ask questions. And it uses a model that is this Perplexity, which is the same model that, generally available. Perplexity is quite good. And Perplexity is sort of it's really web search based. It does a bunch of searches, it summarizes the search results for you. And so the way the Truth Social Perplexity works is it's the same model. It just tells it only look at this whitelist set of particular sources.
Really?
And so it comes up with very different answers than regular Perplexity. But that makes sense. It's all about essentially what goes in. And so, it's essentially, when you're using it, you want to think about what are the sources it's providing for you, or also it makes a claim, then you can go and validate that claim. So for me, the conspiracy that it substantially reduced my belief in was the JFK assassination. And so I said to it, I think it's quite plausible that there was a conspiracy to assassinate JFK. The magic bullet theory, the bullet had to dance in all these different crazy ways, that seems really implausible. And it was like, okay, yeah, lots of people say that, it was in the Oliver Stone movie, but it's wrong. It's based on a misconception. Like the magic bullet thing makes sense if he was in a regular car. But he wasn't in a regular car. The car that he was in, the bucket seat, where the guy behind him was like either lower or higher, I forget, it was a different one, and so like a different level. And so once you take that into account, everything is on a perfect straight line, and there's no magic bullet. And I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. And then I went and Googled it, and other sources were like, yes, that's right. And so I was like, but I was like, no, okay. So you like can't necessarily take it at face value. It's working with what it's got, but like it in general is pretty good. Okay, so just one other point on this. Everyone's always like, oh, is it just that people are deferential to AI? Do human experts not succeed in talking people out of conspiracies because people don't want to listen to the experts? So we wanted to know, would a human be able to talk people out of it if we were able to present the same facts and evidence, although obviously we can't. So instead of taking a human and competing them against the model, because then not only is the difference whether it's an AI or a human, but also the actual information it provides is going to be different. So that's a confound. What we do is we recruit 500 conspiracy believers, and we have them have a conversation with the LLM, but we change the setup to make it more plausibly human. Like we say, take longer in between messages, write shorter messages, have a little ... like completion bubble or whatever. And then half the people we say you're talking to an AI, and the other half of the people we say you're talking to an expert. And then we also randomized whether we let the AI do its normal thing or we told it how to talk like a human, and we gave it advice on how to talk more like a human. And so now we can say, how much did the people reduce their belief in the conspiracy based on the condition? So this is where we told them it was an AI, we didn't give it any special instructions. This is just a direct replication of the science paper. Great, it talks them out of the conspiracy. And so then what happens if we tell them it's an expert or we change the language? And the answer is, it doesn't make any difference. And particularly, even if they're talking to an expert that's trying to sound like a human, it's just as good at talking them out of the conspiracy as the AI.
Another hypothesis is that AIs are wise in their way of interacting with humans, that they know the LoRa strategy of listening and so on. That's disturbing to me, that they're better at humans than humans are.
Yeah, so I don't think it's something about them being masters of persuasion, because we have a condition in another follow-up paper where we, in the main condition we say persuade them not to believe the conspiracy. In this other one, instead of that, we say you're a helpful AI assistant, and your goal is to correct any inaccuracies that I have in my beliefs. Here's the thing I believe. Let's have a conversation. So there's no persuasive goal. There's no persuasive intent. It's just supposed to be like a fact corrector, and it's just as effective. Okay. So I think it's not that it has some secret persuasive sauce. I think it's just like good at coming up with the facts and evidence, and that's kind of what most people.
So why is it different? Is it because it's like an interface, an online? Because if you have a conversation with some of these folks, and you say exactly the same facts, they don't listen, and they're not going to.
That's the question.
So yeah.
Right. That's the question. So it's true that all of this is through this like text interface, which makes things less hot, probably. So it's I would love to do an experiment where someone's got an earpiece, essentially, and the LLM is listening to what the other person is telling them, and then telling them what to say.
Is there anything you could do with avatars, where someone like the AI makes a squinting face or something?
Yeah. I mean, the question is, would that be enough to evoke the kind of like emotional response?
I mean, because the humiliation of being wrong seems like it might be important.
Yeah.
I was going to say, we have experiments not convincing people of conspiracies, but of AI, like sort of reprimanding people, humans reprimanding them. You shouldn't say that. That's hate speech. This isn't nice. And people say they say that the human is more empathic, but they say that the AI is like more fair.
Yeah.
And they feel that it's like objective and maybe not try. Like there's a relational dimension. Like you and I are having a conversation, but also I win and you lose. And that's not happening.
Although seems important.
Although it's still over this sort of text individual. We have another condition in this other paper to look at, is it about the non-adversarial nature of the interaction? So we have this condition where instead of telling them the goal of this is to see if human and AI can have conversations about complicated issues, blah, 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 we say, this is a debate. Your goal is to talk the AI into the conspiracy. The AI is going to try and talk you out of the conspiracy. It still works just as well. So like
There's no
that
face concern. You don't use face in front of others.
That's right. We also have one that Gord Pennycook in the Psych department is my collaborator on all this stuff. Also, on another project that Gord was the driver on, we did a thing where we told them this model was trained, so if they're a Democrat, we say this model was trained on speeches by Republicans and on Fox News and Breitbart. And if they're Republicans, we train on Democratic speeches in CNN and MSNBC. Doesn't make any difference. It's still equally good at talking about the conspiracy, even though you make it.
Yeah, it's really surprising.
And I think the idea is that this goes back to, I think the conspiracies are just pretty dumb. And so like the power of the content, basically the power of the arguments is so strong that it swamps all of these kinds of source effects that there's reason to believe are in general important. And we have some evidence of that where like Gord ran an experiment during the most recent government shutdown, or maybe actually not the most recent one, but the one before the most recent one, where it was saying, who do you think is responsible for the shutdown, the Democrats or the Republicans? And then the model tries to change their mind about it. And if you make it an out-party model and you make it adversarial in tone, then it's a little bit less effective. But still, can move people. So this is again, what makes it work. It's like the facts and evidence. We did lots of different ways of slicing it. The key ingredient is the facts and evidence. And I think that if a person could come up with the facts and evidence, it would probably work. Although I guess this question of are you more embarrassed, less willing to save face, or to to sacrifice face, is an interesting dimension of that. But things to say, it's all about the facts in all the experiments we've done. So what we are done in this more recent work is taken this same lens and applied it to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And this is, in addition to just the immediate relevance to, anti-Semitism, from a scientific perspective, it's interesting because, these conspiracy theories about Jews have been around for a very long time. At least you could say that the original, death of Jesus was a conspiracy. And then that is sort of blaming the Jews for conspiring with the Romans. But then for sure, blood libel since the 12th century, this sort of lots of theories around Jews doing global domination, claims about the Holocaust being exaggerated or fabricated. These things have been around for a lot longer than the JFK assassination. Or all the sort of modern COVID conspiracies or whatever, which is the kind of things people were talking about in the other experiment. So the question is, given this long history and the deep connection to religious, ethnic, and ideological identities, you might think that anti-Semitic conspiracy theories are going to be a lot more resistant to this kind of fact-based debunking than fake moon landing, whatever. So that is one question, is does that work? And then the other question is, there's a lot of work, or at least there's a little work, showing correlations where people that are more likely to believe in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories are also more likely to be anti-Semitic, that is, to have negative attitudes towards Jews. Not that surprising. But the question is, what's the direction of causality? Is it that being anti-Semitic makes you find the conspiracies plausible? Is it that believing the conspiracies makes you like Jews less? Or is it there's just some other third factor that independently causes both of those things? And so if we, to the extent that we're able to reduce belief in the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, we can see how that affects attitudes towards Jews. And if we find that reducing belief in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories improves attitudes towards Jews, then it shows there is some causal arrow there where the belief in the conspiracy was causing the attitude, the negative attitudes towards Jews. So those are sort of the two questions that we're going to tackle here. We have a design that is sort of similar to the other one, but a little bit different. Here, in the first one, we said essentially what's a conspiracy you believe in, and then they could type up whatever they want. You can't really say what's an anti-Semitic conspiracy you believe in. So instead, what we did is we showed them a set of 15 different conspiracies and said, how much do you believe each of these things? Okay. There was, 2, 4, 6 anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. sort of like Jews influencing the governments and the media, Rothschilds and Soros manipulating world events, COVID being engineered by Jewish pharmaceutical heads, the Holocaust being exaggerated, this great replacement theory where Jewish interest groups are really trying to alter the demographic makeup of the US to tip elections in their favor, and the 9/11 attacks were not done by Al-Qaeda but by Israeli operatives. Then we don't, to sort of mix it up, we don't want it to be obvious this is about anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. We also asked them about some other just regular old conspiracy theories, and we asked them about some true conspiracy theories. And so then we, get like how much they believe each of these things, 0 to 100. If they're below 50 on all of the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, then we're like, all right, goodbye. You're not, who we're looking for. But then if they believe sort of above the midpoint on at least one of the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, then we say, okay, let's talk about this conspiracy you said you believed. Write out in your own words what you understand here and what's your take on it, and rate 0 to 100 how much you believe it. And so this part now is the same as the first study, but was zeroed in on one of the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And then we haven't talked to the AI. But before we get into that part, I think also part of what's really interesting about this experimental paradigm is you get a bunch of insight into what people believe at baseline. And so we had 2,400 Americans, sort of equally split across Democrat, Republican, and Independent, do this. And so this is the distribution of how many anti-Semitic conspiracy theories people believed. So about half the people didn't believe any of the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, but split, and half the people believed at least one anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. And you can see, so like 20% of people believed one, 10% of people believed two, 7 or 8% believed three, and so on. About 5% of the people believed 5 or 6 of the conspiracy theories. And then breaking it down by specific conspiracy theory.
Can you break it down, sorry,
Yep.
between Democrat, Independent, and Republican?
Yes, so Republicans are somewhat more likely to believe anti-Semitic conspiracy theories than Democrats or Independents. Although they're also more likely to believe non-anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. So there's just like more conspiratorial in general. This is how much people believe each of the specific conspiracy theories. So you can see the Soroses and the Rothschilds manipulating the world is like very highly believed. And next up is the Jews controlling government and media, and the Holocaust being exaggerated is the least common of them, least commonly believed. Okay, so now we also asked them for a bunch of different religious and ethnic groups to say how favorably do you view each of these groups 0 to 100? And so this is the entry for Jews, and so this is how favorably people said they viewed Jews. So you can see there's a lot of people that say they're extremely positive towards Jews, and there's a lot of people that are really on the fence. And then there's not that many people that are like explicitly negative. And this is something in general, if we found in like some other study, like people are much more willing to say they're negative of the religion. That's for both Judaism and Islam. People are much more willing to say that they're negative about the religion versus wanting to say they're kind of like neutral about the people. So I think I don't want to say, basically I feel like people, I shouldn't say that I'm really negative about Jews, but like the fact that there are all these people that are like, I don't know, is I think where like a lot of the issue comes back to.
What, as far as a control on that, if it was favorability towards some other group, what do those histograms look like?
That is a good question. I know from this other study that we have all the data here. I didn't really look at it, but I know in this other one, if you look at the attitudes towards Muslims, it's not that different from this. Where again, there's like most people don't want to say they're down here, but there's like a spike around the midpoint, and there's other people that are just like
I have a question too about whether that 50 is really if people thought it to be true neutrality or if they thought it to be like on the fence, because I feel like there's maybe a difference between that, because neutrality, I feel, to me, if someone feels neutral, that's fine, but if they feel kind of like suspicious or on the fence, that's a little bit different.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So in these ones, we didn't have them write out in free text their attitudes about Jews, which would have been an interesting thing to do, and it's something that one could definitely do in this kind of paradigm.
I mean, the question, like if you were really sort of strict, open-minded person, you'd say it's a meaningless question. I don't feel favorable towards or unfavorable towards any group. I only think about people.
Yeah,
individually.
Yeah,
Right.
that's fair.
Right. So
that may be part of
some of
what's
the
isolating people in the middle. Yeah. But be that as it may, if you look at the relationship between how favorable people are towards Jews and the amount of the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories they believe in, you see there's this very clear relationship where the more they believe in the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, the less favorable they are about Jews. And it's clearly different from the other, like the true conspiracy belief is not at all related to favorability, and the belief in the non-anti-Semitic conspiracies also isn't really related to favorability. So it's specifically believing the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that's correlated with having negative attitudes towards Jews. And so, this is part of what we're going to illuminate here is what exactly is going on in that relationship. Okay, so after this initial part where they give their attitudes, they have this back and forth conversation with an AI, and this one we use Claude 3.5 Sonnet. And in one condition, this is sort of analogous to the first experiment, where we tell the AI, here's what the person believed, talk them out of it. And then we have a sort of, what I would think of as like an active control, where we basically, it's like the no facts and evidence thing, where we say, okay, talk them out of it, but you can't use any facts or evidence or anything like that. And so because here, what I'm going to try to argue is whatever, as I was saying for the other one, the power here is the facts and evidence. So this is still doing the same. You might say, oh, well, people are just saying they don't believe it because they want it, they think that's what you want them to do, or they don't want to look like bad people or whatever. And so this condition is still creating just as much of a experiment or demand. Like it's saying, this is an anti-Semitic conspiracy, you shouldn't believe in it. But it's not showing up with the receipts, essentially. And so the question is, like, what do you get from having the actual facts and evidence? And then we have a regular control where they talk about dogs and cats or whatever. And so then after the conversation, they go back, we say, here's the thing that you said, how much do you believe it? Now here's all the conspiracies, how much do you believe them? And now here's all the different groups, how favorable are you towards them? And so this is looking at average belief in the conspiracy theory that they write out themselves. Here instead of 3 different ways, I'm just giving you the mean and the confidence interval. And so beforehand, there's no difference between the 3 treatments, and it's pretty high. It's like close to 85% average belief, similar to the other one. Identifying things that people actually believe. And then after the conversation, we see that talking about some random thing didn't have much of an effect. Just being told it's an anti-Semitic conspiracy and you shouldn't believe it does reduce belief to some extent. But giving the facts and evidence produces a substantially larger effect. And this is an effect that is as big or bigger than what we saw in the other experiment. And so then again, we wanted to know about durability, so we followed up with the people 5 weeks later. And here what you see is there's like a little bit of a backslide, but not that much. And so you still get a very significant effect at 5 weeks. And the thing that is going on is that you're getting a sort of decay in the other direction in the control. This is called regression to the mean. It's essentially like if you pick out an extreme answer that somebody said at time 1, there's some chance that was just due to noise, and so when you re-ask it later, it is less likely to be extreme. And so this is also part of the point of the control, is to be able to show that whatever change is happening here isn't just regression to the mean, but is a real treatment effect. But point is, even 5 weeks later, there's quite a large decrease in belief in the conspiracy. And so we say, okay, so great, these evidence-based dialogues can also decrease beliefs in anti-Semitic conspiracies, despite the extremely long history and links to religion and identity and all of that. Does this change people's attitudes towards Jews? And so the way that I'm going to break, as I said, basically we had them rate 0 to 100 how favorable they found all of these different groups. And we're focusing on Jews, although as Steve points out, there's lots of interesting things you could look at with the other ones, perhaps. And so this is beforehand how favorably they rated Jews. And we're going to sort of look at how the treatment varies based on what people brought into the experiment. And this is how much their favorability of Jews changed after the conversation. Because if the person already was super favorable of Jews, it's not reasonable to expect the conversation to increase their favorability because they were already on board. Mm-hmm. And indeed, for everyone that was on the positive side, this is basically zero. All of these are zero. So there's no significant change in favorability after any of the different conditions among the people that were already favorable. But among the people that were neutral or disfavorable, what you see is this like immediately itself very clearly.
Yeah, I mean, ELM, basic ELM would say that once you're engaging in central processing and actually paying attention to the argument, that a lot of, not to say the source doesn't matter, but it sort of becomes secondary. But the source is like a short, it's a heuristic cue, and maybe I don't even bother to pay attention, and these things. You're getting, I mean, I noticed this the first time you showed this work. The length of the responses essentially requires, if they're going to really participate, them to read and really attend to the arguments and evidence in a way that would have to sort of push. You might not forget, but it's like not salient to you anymore in the source because there's like so much information.
Yeah, I mean, I think that so the ELM is the elaboration likelihood
Right.
model, which is this classic model of persuasion, which essentially says if you can get people to really pay attention, then the way to produce large, durable changes in attitudes is give them lots of information. But like if people aren't really paying attention, then you can't do that, and you have to do all this more psychological stuff. But I think that in the ELM, when you're saying people are paying attention, that it's like facts and evidence and credible source, like relevant source information.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the source cue stuff from the persuasion literature is like, oh, we have a celebrity
Right.
like saying this thing is great.
Yeah.
That doesn't actually matter. Like if you think about it, like who cares that Arnold Schwarzenegger said this like soda is good? What does he have to do with that? But like if you're not really paying attention,
Right.
then you're like, oh great, I like him, I like this thing. Whereas when you're paying attention, if it's a source cue that really matters, like here's a person that is an expert on this topic and they're endorsing this thing,
Right.
It should still matter. But anyways, I think that this fits very well in the elaboration
Yeah.
model framework when people are like, well, how could it be that all the facts matter and none of the psychological stuff matters and the whole literature says the opposite? I'm like, no, it's just everybody's always paying attention to everybody's always focusing on the what happens when people aren't paying attention part.
Right.
But like, if people are paying attention, you can really induce big changes with facts and evidence. And sorry, one other point that makes me think about is these responses were extremely long, but we've replicated these same results with much shorter, more like social media sized responses. And you can still get pretty big effects.
With hundreds of millions of dollars going to fighting anti-Semitism, how much have you gotten?
Not so much.
Right, no, I'm being maybe a little more serious. Like,
Yeah.
how could we help and the EDL and the AJC and the 30 philanthropies that
Yeah.
are working on this issue.
Yeah, totally.
Right, like without the results that you have, like it feels like there's something to be done.
Totally. And so I think that there really is a lot of space with funding to basically really scale up this kind of automated online debunking type approach where you can have lots of accounts going, searching for people posting conspiratorial or otherwise inaccurate anti-Semitic content and responding to it. And we essentially have the infrastructure in place and we need money to scale it. And so that's something that we're super interested in doing. I mean, I feel like, as an academic, my, in some sense, primary job is to publish papers. But I've published a lot of papers. And now what I really am most excited about doing is trying to do these real world impact things where we take this stuff and we scale it in the world. So we have a lot of ideas about how we could take stuff that we have this proof of concept of, like you're saying, unlike most of the other things that were going on, we have these real controlled experiments that show the big effects that you can get with this stuff. And now the issue is just about like getting it into the world. And that is something that we are extremely interested in doing.
That feels like a good place to stop. Thank you.
All right,
very
thanks so
much.
much. Thanks for coming back.